If you're looking to buy a camera lens today, there are literally hundreds of options to choose from. So how do you pick one? Recently, I've been looking for something to pair with my 24-70, and that's got me thinking about what are my true priorities in a lens. And I decided that most of all, I need something different. This is the TT Artisan 11mm fisheye. Alright, I have a lot of thoughts on this lens and why I chose it for my kit, but before I get too far into any of that, let's talk about the specs. This is TT Artisan's 11mm full-frame fisheye lens. It has a 7-blade aperture of f2.8 to f16. It weighs about 490 grams, and it has a minimum focus distance of 0.17 meters. And with all that, it comes in at $235. And beyond those numbers, this lens has some other good things going for it too, like the build quality. The all-metal body design makes it feel super durable and also gives it some weight without making it too heavy. The aperture and focus rings have a lot of resistance, which isn't always the best thing, but it at least gives you some comfort knowing that it's not going to fall out of focus when you don't want it to. This lens is also very small. Like, it looks tiny on my already small A7C camera body, which comes with the advantage of making this lens pretty light and easy to take around, or even to fit into small spaces to get certain shots. So this lens has a lot of good things going for it, but at this price point, there's always going to be a few drawbacks. So on the flip side, here's what's not so good about this lens. When you're getting a cheap lens like this one of the first things you're almost always going to miss out on is autofocus. And this lens is no exception to that. This lens is manual focus only. On the bright side of things, with this being such a wide angle lens, as long as you stop up the aperture a little bit, most of the image is going to be in focus anyways, but no autofocus, it is a drawback. And then the second thing that this lens misses out on to reach that price point is no in-lens stabilization. To me, again, this isn't that much of a drawback, with many camera bodies these days having in-body stabilization, and there's also stabilization options in post, or you could even throw it on a gimbal and you'd never know the difference. On top of that, this lens just isn't the sharpest thing in the world. It's plenty sharp enough for video purposes, but if you're someone who likes taking portraits and being able to count pores on someone's face, then this definitely is not the lens for that. And the last gripe I'll mention with this lens is this convex front element. This is something that's present on all kinds of fisheye lenses, whether they're cheap or expensive, but it does limit your ability to use lens filters. Okay, but now that you know some of the specifics, I want to talk more importantly about why I chose this lens in particular to go in my kit. So I recently purchased this lens in November of last year, and it took the spot next to my 24-70 as the second lens in my kit, which I think to some would come as a bit of a weird choice to round out a kit. I feel like I hear people online talking a lot about the trinity of lenses, or the trifecta of lenses, whatever they call it. Basically, the idea is you get 3 lenses that round out the normal focal ranges before you deviate to weird niche lenses like fisheyes. A kit like this might include a 24-70 to cover the middle focal ranges, and then something like a 70-200 to cover the telephoto end, and then maybe something like a 16-35 to cover the wide end of focal ranges. I, on the other hand, started off with my 24-70, and then I jumped to a fisheye. So why did I choose such a niche lens to round out my kit? I would argue I have a few good reasons. First of all being that, yes, this is a fisheye lens, but it doesn't have to be. With a quick lens correction and maybe a little bit of cropping in post, this lens quickly turns into a much more standard wide-angle lens, which altogether gives this lens a ton of viable use cases. For example, you can get those ultra-wide distorted shots that fisheye lenses are known for. It can capture a wide viewing angle of crazy small spaces, or really big ones. Or I can throw my camera in 4K and get simple talking head shots like this with room to either punch in or zoom out. But all that functionality isn't actually the main reason that I got this lens. So I want to explain a little bit about my lens philosophy. Okay, lens philosophy. What does that even mean? All I really mean by that is the reasoning behind the choices you make for the lenses you choose. Whether they call it that or not, everyone that has a camera with a lens has their own lens philosophy. And to take that a step further, there's two main types of lenses that I want to talk about, and each has their own distinct philosophy. And these two lens types are photo lenses and cinema lenses. And let's talk about photo lenses first. For 90% of you, when you think of a camera lens, you're probably thinking of a photo lens. Photo lenses are the most common type of camera lens, and they're also made for DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, which, if you see a camera out in the world, is probably the type of camera you're seeing. At least in my experience, the quality of a photo lens is generally judged based on a certain set of standard criteria. These criteria include things like sharpness, lens distortion, or chromatic aberration, with lenses being better if they have more sharpness, less distortion, and less chromatic aberration. And that right there is the philosophy of photo lenses. People generally choose the lens that's within their budget and performs best at these particular tests. And this is a perfectly valid way of comparing lenses. These things are measurable and quantifiable, and it's the goal of a lot of lens manufacturers to best meet these criteria. But I would also argue that these things don't necessarily make a lens better. I mean, if you imagine a world where every lens is perfectly sharp, has zero distortion or color shift or chromatic aberration, the images would look great, but there wouldn't be that much separating any one lens from another. Everything would just look the same. But then if you look into the world of cinema lenses, at least in my experience, I've found the conversation to be a lot different. When people are comparing cinema lenses, you'll oftentimes hear them talk about character, which just refers to how each different brand and lens treats the light a little bit differently. Some lenses might have a warmer or cooler tone to them, some might have barrel distortion or chromatic aberration, or the flares might look different. And these things aren't flaws, they're considered deliberate characteristics. It's the imperfections in each lens that gives it its own personality, and you don't choose a lens based on how perfect the shot looks, you choose the one that best fits the story you're trying to tell. And now I've taken that cinema lens philosophy and kind of applied it to my entire kit selection. In the modern video landscape, people are watching more content than ever, and people are also creating more content than ever. And what that really comes down to for the video creator is that if there's nothing making your video look different or stand out, it can easily get ignored. And so right now when I'm looking for video gear, I'm not just looking for something to fill a functional role, I'm also looking for something that'll be different enough to stand out. Something that'll bring viewers into the story that I'm trying to tell. Another great example of this is these diopter filters that I got off Amazon. These are screw-on filters that turn your lens into a makeshift macro lens, but these particular ones have a distinct blurring and distortion effect that they add to your shot. Some people might see this as a drawback, but that's actually one of my favorite things about these. And that's exactly the same reason that I think this lens really excels. It's not the sharpest or cleanest lens you've ever seen, but it definitely gives your videos a distinct look that separates them from everything else. And now's when you might be saying, Lucas, you're coping, you just can't afford better lenses. Shut up. If I had a bigger budget, would I buy a more expensive lens than this? Yes, but the philosophy still applies. If I was buying a more expensive lens, I might be looking at something like a Laowa 10mm fisheye before I'd be looking at something like a G Master 16-35. But at the end of the day, video gear isn't cheap, and I'm really glad that there's lenses like this for those of us who can't buy $2,000 lenses every month. So then, who is this lens for? This lens really doesn't check a lot of the boxes that people talk about with photo lenses. The shots that you get out of this thing might not be the sharpest, they might be a little shaky, and just all around a little rougher around the edges than you might expect from some other lenses. But at the same time, the shots you get out of this thing are also going to be unique and interesting and different. And for me, that was enough to earn it a spot in my kit. Okay, if you've made it to this point, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your interesting camera takes in the comments, or just let me know what's in your kit. If you're new, welcome, and that's it. Peace.